Each time we undertake some kind of new experience in our life, we are adding layers to this circle, to this spiral, as it emanates from that central point of origin. It's sort of a guidebook for educators who want to apply what it calls a Qur'anic framework for education. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome back to the Scholastica Bookshelf. My name is Marina, and in this series I explore books that are of interest and inshallah will be of benefit to Muslim parents, educators and homeschoolers. Today I'm really excited to be sharing with you this book called Concentric Circles, Nurturing Awe and Wonder in Early Learning by Elma Ruth Harder in consultation with Sheikh Muzaffar Iqbal. Now this book I actually had to borrow from a friend, so my close friend has kindly lent me this book. It's a little bit difficult to get hold of. It was published first in 2006, so almost 20 years ago, and I guess they had a limited run. There aren't that many copies of this around, so if you do know a place to get a good copy of this book, please do drop that in the comments down below so others can inshallah try and get hold of a copy. So this book, I would describe it like a textbook. It's nice and chunky size, it's quite thick here, and this book is a guide, essentially. It says a foundational approach. It's sort of a guidebook for educators who want to apply what it calls a Qur'anic framework for education. The foundational purpose of Concentric Circles is to create a very holistic education for children, one that has to be grounded and rooted in a Qur'anic worldview, and I'll go into more detail about what they mean by this. So essentially the idea of concentric circles is to create a visual representation for a spiritual concept. Imagine that at the center of a circle is the point at which the human being is created. This is the origin source of the soul when we first come into existence, and the origin of all things, of course, as we Muslims know, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the unity, the tawheed of Allah. And so once that ruh, the soul, is blown into the human body, into the child, we then undergo a series of circular motions. So from this central point we go around and our life progresses. Imagine a spiral, so the circular motion going around and around. We are always connected to this central root, this central point of origin, but as we grow we develop more complex ideas about the world, about things that we experience, and each of those creates a layer upon layer upon layer, increasing in complexity and increasing the diameter of this circle. So each time we undertake some kind of new experience in our life, we are adding layers to this circle, to this spiral, as it emanates from that central point of origin. Another way to view the concept of concentric circles, as stated by the author, is to think of just a small circle in the center, and that center being tawheed, that belief in the oneness of Allah. And every time we add something new to our life, for example our physical or sensory perception of things, and then we add another layer of our relationships with our family members, or relationship with the community that we live in, our relationships with the environment, the space that we inhabit, with creation, with nature, each of these things adds another layer around that central core, but at the center of all things should be the fundamental principle of tawheed, of the oneness of Allah, the oneness of creation. As the authors state, education is not just about the transfer of information or skills from a teacher to a child. It's about nurturing awe and wonder and a connection to our creator in every aspect of learning. The book explicitly addresses the issue of worldview in education. So it asks readers to really evaluate what is the source of your worldview, what is the pedagogical framework by which you're operating, and how do your values influence the way in which you view and enact the act of education. This is so refreshing, and it's really necessary, because we often go into education with certain preconceptions and assumptions about what it means to be educated, about what it means to teach a child, about what success looks like, where we have to really step back and unpack those preconceptions and think, okay, what are my assumptions? What are the biases that I come to education with? And what is the role of the teacher or the facilitator in terms of the imparting of certain values to the child that is being taught? So this book is really well structured. It feels and reads like a textbook. It seems to be primarily directed towards educators who are trying to set up some kind of cooperative learning environment. So perhaps it is a home education co-op or someone who's trying to set up an Islamic school. It talks about the young learner, i.e. the child that we are teaching, but also it talks about the not so young learner, i.e. the parent or educator. So what the authors are trying to say, in essence, is that the parent or teacher is not only the kind of teacher and facilitator, but also they are a learner in and of themselves. In order for a teacher to create an environment of awe and wonder and of an appreciation for the wonders of creation, that teacher needs themselves to be a learner. The entire first chapter is dedicated to the two learners. So we talk about the child and the predispositions of children and the ways that children learn, but then also the adult learner and how the facilitator needs to be highly self-reflective and to evaluate their own preconceptions about education and the way that they are passing on knowledge, wisdom, experiences, information. In the introduction it reads, "Our interpretation takes place through a peculiar lens and on the basis of a pre-existing worldview which filters everything we see and do, from experiencing the rustling of leaves in the wind to traumatic moments in our lives. It is this worldview that has always been the prime concern of Islamic education. What role does our education play in this process? The young learner in a class or at home is not aware of these questions, let alone their answers. He or she is busy living a life in the here and now, in the very moment of his or her existence." So what the book is telling us is that children are almost passively absorbing a particular worldview given that the surroundings that they have. It talks a lot about the primordial nature, the fitra, the natural disposition of children, and how in the beginning stages and the very early years of their life, they are very, very close to this natural disposition. And the way that their outward environment is sculptured by their parents, caregivers, and educators around them will hugely, hugely impact the way that the child will then view, through which lens they will view information, events, and facts. The book goes on to say, rather than arithmetic, language arts, and science lessons, it is this moulding of the young learner that is the most important aspect of early childhood education. Once formed, this framework has a profound effect on one's entire life. What the author is trying to express in this book is that in the very early years of education, we need to mould a child's worldview into being a Qur'anic worldview, one in which we hold the centrality of Tawheed, of the oneness of God, as being the lens through which we view everything. As well as thoroughly explaining the background to this Quranic worldview, the book then has lots of very practical advice about how to go about structuring education in order to help best nurture this Quranic worldview. She explores the space, the physical environment in which we surround ourselves, which has a huge impact on the way that children are conditioned to learn. Time, considering the concept of time, the passage of time, how we create habits and routines, and the importance of learning at particular times and structuring our learning around the 5 daily prayers, for example. The next chapter talks all about language, not just in the sense of the symbols of written language, the alphabets and decoding and reading and so on, but also the languages of other aspects of creation. For example, mathematics and art have their own unique languages and speak to the child's spirit in a particular way. The book also talks about the centrality of the Arabic language and why that is so important in the early educational stages for Muslim children in terms of connecting with the Word of God. There are a number of other sections, and what the author tries to do is to say, okay, we don't want to have a very rigid, strict a view of education. Okay, here's a module, here's a unit, we need to cover X, Y, Z topics. Rather, in the early years, there should be a somewhat flexible approach, following children's curiosity and interests while facilitating discussions around certain, what she calls, threads and themes. So there are certain threads that can be followed across the course of all subject matter. For example, the role of symbolism or the role of the oneness of God, and how those things can be woven into every aspect of the curriculum. Meanwhile, there are themes that are particular areas that one can study. One could compare this to the unit studies module of early education, which many homeschoolers follow. That is to say, we don't want to study mathematics and science and English and various things in isolation, but what we do is we create a unit and we say, for example, okay, this term we are going to focus all about plants and nature, and through plants and nature we're going to weave in mathematics, we're going to weave in science, we're going to weave in ecology, we're going to work our language arts around that theme of plants and nature. So I would say, in terms of pre-existing education philosophies, this book is most close to the unit studies approach, with a heavy emphasis on creating a Qur'anic framework, a Qur'anic paradigm for education. In the book there are lots of practical examples. At the end of each chapter there are worksheets. For example, you have charts that you can photocopy and print out. There are reflective learning exercises, both for the children and for the facilitators. What the authors really want to emphasize is that when we think about Islam and learning about Islam, thinking about Arabic language, we shouldn't be seeing this as just another box in our curriculum. So we study maths and we study English and we study French and we study Islam and we study history. Rather, Islam should be the connecting thread between all of the things we study, especially in those early years. Early childhood plays the most important role in building this fundamental Qur'anic worldview, in solidifying this conceptual framework that the child will carry with them in their adult life. You know, it's a really wonderful resource, and as I mentioned, it's ideally a book, a textbook, a guidebook designed for those who are trying to create some kind of learning center, some kind of Islamic, either homeschool co-op or an Islamic early learning center or school. I do want to spend more time delving into this. It's a book that you can read cover to cover over the course of a week or so, but then you'll want to dip into it again and again as you progress in your educational journey with the children under your care. It's going to take me a little bit of time to fully absorb all of these gems, and it might be a book that I end up borrowing more than once from my friend. But if you do know somewhere where you can get a copy, please do drop that down in the comments below. Concentric Circles is a treasure trove of wonderful insights, and I'm so grateful to have been able to share some of the essence of this with you. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and share with others who you think would benefit. And let me know in the comments, is there a book that has particularly inspired or changed the way that you approach education? I'd love to hear from you so that I get more ideas for books to include in the Scholastica Bookshelf. Until next time, happy homeschooling, happy learning, happy reading, and may your journey educating your children be blessed. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.